"You'll fall in seconds, human," the alien princess mocked, but she didn't expect his strength. Part 5. 3 days had passed since the arena fight, and the imperial palace of Volantos Prime glowed with lights that celebrated the new trade agreement between Earth and the Kethrani Empire. And representatives from dozens of species filled the grand reception hall with conversation and speculation about the future park. Jinho stood on a balcony overlooking the celebration, and his body was wrapped in medical bandages beneath his formal diplomatic attire. And the palace physicians had expressed amazement that he was walking at all. And they had informed him that any Kethrani who sustained similar injuries would require weeks of recovery. Ambassador Yoon had ordered him to rest, but he had declined with respectful firmness. And he had told her that resting during this crucial moment would send the wrong message about human resilience. And she had ultimately agreed with his reasoning. The trade agreement had passed through the Imperial Council with unanimous approval, and Princess Solarix had spoken passionately in favor of the human delegation. And her words had carried weight that no amount of diplomatic maneuvering could have achieved. And Earth now had a foothold in one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the galaxy. "You are supposed to be celebrating with the others," a familiar voice said from behind him. And Jinho turned to find Solarix approaching through the balcony doorway with 2 goblets of ceremonial wine in her lower hands. She moved differently than she had in the arena, and her posture was more relaxed and open, and her scales shimmered with soft blue and silver patterns that Jinho had learned indicated contentment or peace. "I could say the same to you," he replied. And he accepted the goblet she offered with a nod of thanks. "Your father seemed eager to show you off to the visiting dignitaries." Solarix made a sound that might have been laughter. "My father is eager to understand what happened in the arena," she corrected. And she moved to stand beside him at the balcony railing. "He has questioned me many times about our fight, and I do not think my answers satisfy him." Jinho sipped the wine and was surprised to find it pleasantly sweet. "What answers does he seek?" he asked. Solarix was quiet for a moment, as she stared out at the glittering city below. "He wants to know why I yielded," she finally said, and her voice was thoughtful and distant. "I have tried to explain, but the words seem inadequate, and I do not think he understands that you gave me a gift far greater than victory." Jinho turned to look at her with curiosity. "What gift do you mean?" he asked. "Perspective," she answered. And she met his eyes with an openness that would have been impossible 3 days ago. "I was raised to believe that strength meant dominance, and that the strong must crush the weak to prove their worth, and that mercy was a flaw that would be exploited by enemies." She set her goblet on the railing and folded all 4 arms across her chest. "You showed me a different kind of strength," she continued, and her voice carried genuine wonder. "The strength to win without destroying, and to earn respect without demanding submission, and to offer mercy when you had every right to cause harm." Jinho considered her words carefully before responding. "On Earth, we have learned these lessons through terrible experience," he said quietly, and memories of human history flickered through his mind. "We spent thousands of years crushing each other, and we fought wars that killed millions, and we came close to destroying ourselves more than once." He turned to face her fully. "We learned that true strength is not about domination," he explained. "It is about having the power to destroy and choosing to build instead, and about turning enemies into allies, and about refusing to give up even when everything seems hopeless." Solarix absorbed his words with the intensity of someone hearing wisdom she had sought her entire life. "I have requested assignment as the Kethrani liaison to Earth," she said suddenly, and the admission seemed to surprise even herself. "My father found the request unusual, but he granted it." Jinho raised an eyebrow. "You wish to come to Earth?" he asked, and he could not entirely hide his surprise. "I wish to understand your people," she clarified, and determination colored her voice. I wish to learn how a species so young and so physically fragile has developed such strength of spirit. And I wish to see the world that produces warriors like you. Before Jinho could respond, a Volanthi diplomat approached the balcony with obvious hesitation, and she bowed deeply to both of them. Forgive my intrusion, she said, and her multiple eyes flickered between them nervously. The Princess Solarix. There are representatives from the Consortium of Free Worlds who wish to discuss potential alliance with the Kethrani Empire, and they have specifically requested your presence. Solarix exchanged a glance with Jinho that communicated more than words could express. The galaxy is changing, she observed, and there was something like excitement beneath her formal tone. Word of our fight has spread, and species that have long feared the Kethrani are now curious about the humans who stood against us, and about the Kethrani princess who offered them respect. Jinho added with a slight smile. Solarix acknowledged the point with a tilt of her head. I must attend to this, she said, and she moved toward the balcony doorway before pausing. But I would speak with you again before this evening ends, Park Jinho of Earth. And I have many questions about your world and your people. I would welcome that conversation. He replied honestly. She studied him for a moment with those golden eyes that had once held only contempt, and now held something far more complex and interesting. Tell me, she said, and curiosity colored her voice. Do all humans possess your resilience? Or are you exceptional among your kind? Jinho thought about his family and his friends and his colleagues, and he thought about the billions of humans who had struggled and survived and built civilizations out of nothing. And he thought about the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that seemed woven into human nature. Every human you will ever meet has the same potential, he answered, and pride that he did not try to hide warmed his voice. We are a species of survivors, Princess. And that stubbornness is our greatest strength, and sometimes our greatest weakness. Solarix considered this information with obvious fascination. Then I think the galaxy has severely underestimated your species, she said. And there was no mockery in her tone now. And I think the Kethrani would be wise to have you as allies rather than enemies. She turned to leave, and then paused once more at the doorway. My mocking words in the arena were born of ignorance and arrogance, she said quietly, and the admission cost her visible effort. I said you would fall in seconds, and I expected to prove human weakness. And instead you showed me strength I had never imagined. Jinho nodded with understanding. We all have moments we wish we could take back, he said gently. What matters is what we do next. Solarix stood framed in the doorway with the lights of the celebration glowing behind her, and she looked at this human who had changed everything she believed about the universe. I mocked you because I was afraid, she admitted, and the words came slowly as if she was only now understanding their truth. The Kethrani have ruled this sector for 10,000 years because no one could challenge us. And now I wonder what happens when we are no longer alone at the top. Jinho moved to stand before her with his hands spread in a gesture of openness. You asked me once whether humans would be your downfall or your greatest allies, he reminded her, and a warm smile crossed his battered face. I told you the answer might be both. But I was wrong. She tilted her head with curiosity. What do you mean? She asked. The answer is neither, he explained. And certainty filled his voice. Humans will not be your downfall because we do not seek to conquer. And we will not merely be allies because what is forming between our peoples has the potential to be something far deeper. He extended his hand toward her in the human gesture of partnership. We can be friends, he said simply. We can build something together that neither of us could build alone. And we can face whatever challenges the galaxy brings as partners rather than rivals. Solarix looked at his extended hand, and she thought about everything she had learned in the past 3 days. And she thought about the future stretching out before them, with possibilities that had not existed a week ago. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out with her upper right hand and clasped his in the human fashion. "Friends," she agreed. And the word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "I think I would like that very much." And as they stood together on the balcony of the Imperial Palace, with the future spreading out before them like an unwritten story, both of them knew that the galaxy would never be quite the same again. "You'll fall in seconds." "Human," the alien princess mocked, but she didn't expect his strength. Part 4. Princess Solarix threw herself at Jinho, with the desperate fury of someone fighting against a reality she could not accept. And her attacks had lost their elegant precision and become wild and powerful and dangerous in their unpredictability. And the crowd watched in horrified fascination as their champion abandoned technique for raw aggression. Jinho weathered the storm with his arms raised to protect his head, and each blow that landed sent shockwaves of pain through his battered body, and he felt a rib crack under a particularly vicious strike. And still he refused to retreat. The princess screamed in frustration as she realized that nothing she did seemed to matter. And this human absorbed punishment like water soaking into sand. And no matter how many times she knocked him down, he rose again with those calm eyes fixed on her. "Why will you not stay down?" she demanded. And her voice cracked with exhaustion she had never known. "Why do you keep getting up?" Jinho spat blood onto the obsidian floor and shifted his weight to compensate for his damaged ribs. "Because giving up is not in our nature," he answered. And his voice was quiet but carried across the silent arena. "Humans have faced extinction more times than we can count. And we survived every single time because we do not know how to surrender." He moved forward as she hesitated. And this time, he did not evade or redirect. And he closed the distance between them and caught her upper arms before she could react. And he swept her legs with a technique she had never encountered. And she fell to the obsidian floor with him on top of her. The crowd erupted in shocked cries as their princess hit the ground with a human pinning her down. And this had never happened in all the centuries of the Festival of Proving. And nobles rose from their seats with hands reaching for weapons that were not permitted in the arena. Solarix struggled beneath him with all four arms pushing and pulling and trying to find leverage. But Jinho had positioned himself perfectly, and he used his body weight and the geometry of their positions to neutralize her superior strength. And no matter how she twisted, she could not break free. "Yield," Jinho said quietly, and his voice was meant only for her ears. And despite everything she had done to him, there was no cruelty in his tone. "You have fought with honor, and there is no shame in acknowledging when a battle is over." She thrashed beneath him with renewed fury at these words, and her scales shifted to a deep black that indicated humiliation and rage. "A Kethrani princess does not yield to lesser species," she snarled, and her golden eyes burned with wounded pride. "I would rather die than submit to a human." Jinho looked down at her with something that might have been understanding, and he made no move to hurt her despite having the advantage. And his restraint confused her more than his endurance had. "This does not have to be about submission," he said, and his voice remained calm and even. "I did not come here to humiliate you or your people, and I came here to show that humans deserve respect. And I think I have done that." Solarix stopped struggling for a moment, and she stared up at him with confusion, replacing some of her anger. "You have me pinned to the ground before thousands of witnesses," she said, and bitterness dripped from every word. "How is this not humiliation?" Jinho shook his head slowly. "Only if you choose to see it that way," he replied, and his eyes held hers with intensity that she found difficult to look away from. "You could also choose to see this as a demonstration of mutual respect between warriors, and you could announce that you have found an opponent worthy of your skill. And you could yield without shame, because you have already proven yourself 100 times over in this arena." She lay still beneath him as she considered his words. And the crowd had grown quiet again as they waited to see what would happen. And even Emperor Kethra leaned forward in his private box with obvious interest. "You are protecting my pride," Solarix realized, and wonder crept into her voice despite her efforts to suppress it. "You could have broken my arm when you had the lock. And you could be hurting me now instead of talking. And yet you are giving me a way to end this with dignity." Jinho nodded once. "Where I come from, we have a saying," he told her, and a small smile crossed his battered face. "The best victory is one where both sides walk away with their honor intact." Solarix looked up at this strange creature who had defied everything she believed about the universe. And she thought about all the opponents she had crushed in this arena over the years. And she thought about how none of them had ever offered her mercy when they had the advantage, because none of them had ever been in a position to do so. She thought about strength and what it truly meant. And she realized that crushing those weaker than yourself required no strength at all. And true strength was having the power to destroy and choosing not to use it. "What is your name?" she asked. And her voice had changed into something softer than before. "I fought you without knowing who you are. And that seems wrong now." "Park Jinho," he answered. And he eased some of the pressure from his hold without releasing her entirely. "Park Jinho," she repeated. And the human syllables were strange on her tongue, but she spoke them with care. "I am Solarix Val Kethra, third daughter of the Kethrani Emperor, and Blade of the Western Reach, and champion of 47 festival victories." She took a breath that seemed to cost her something precious. "And I yield to you." "Park Jinho of Earth," she announced, and her voice carried across the arena for all to hear. "You have proven yourself a warrior of exceptional skill and honor, and humanity has earned the respect of the Kethrani people this day." Jinho released her immediately and rose to his feet, and he extended his hand to help her up. And after a moment of hesitation, she accepted his assistance and stood beside him on the arena floor. The crowd did not know how to respond, and shocked silence stretched for several heartbeats. And then Emperor Kethra rose from his private box and began to applaud. And the sound of his approval spread through the arena, like ripples across water, until thousands of aliens were celebrating what they had witnessed. Ambassador Yoon collapsed into her seat with relief flooding through her body. And Consul Beak was already recording notes about the diplomatic implications of this unprecedented event. And the other members of Earth's delegation stared at the arena floor with expressions of stunned pride. Solarix stood beside Jinho and looked out at the cheering crowd. And then she turned to face him with her scale shifting to colors he had never seen before. "You have changed something tonight," she said quietly, and her words were meant only for him. "I do not know yet whether I should thank you or hate you for it." Jinho smiled despite the pain that movement caused. "Perhaps both," he suggested. And there was warmth in his voice that surprised them both. Solarix studied his battered face for a long moment. And then she did something that made the entire arena gasp once more. She placed her upper right hand over her heart and bowed to him in the traditional Kethrani salute of respect between equals. And this gesture had not been offered to an outsider in living memory. "Perhaps both," she agreed. And when she straightened, there was something new in her golden eyes, something that looked remarkably like hope. "You'll fall in seconds." "Human," the alien princess mocked, but she didn't expect. His strength, Part 3. The arena had fallen into a silence so complete that Jinho could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. And thousands of aliens sat frozen in their seats as they watched the impossible unfold before them. And Princess Solarix stood 3 meters away with her forearms raised in a defensive posture she had never needed to use before. Blood ran down the side of Jinho's face from the cut above his eye, and his ribs screamed with every breath, and his body was covered in bruises that would have incapacitated most species. And yet he stood firm with his eyes locked on his opponent. "What are you?" Solarix demanded. And her voice had lost all trace of its earlier contempt. No creature should be able to absorb such punishment and continue fighting. In the scientific observation section, Dr. Velith of the Galactic Biological Survey gripped the railing with all 6 of her appendages and stared at her scanning equipment with disbelief. "The readings make no sense," she said to her assistant, and her voice carried the confusion of someone whose entire understanding of biology was being challenged. "His body is flooded with chemical compounds that should be toxic at these concentrations. And yet they seem to be enhancing his performance rather than killing him." Her assistant leaned closer to examine the data streaming across the display. "Adrenaline," he read aloud, and the word was unfamiliar on his tongue. "Cortisol and endorphins and something called norepinephrine. And these chemicals are suppressing his pain responses and increasing his strength and reaction speed beyond his baseline capabilities." Dr. Velith switched to a different scanning mode and let out a sound of surprise. "Look at his skeletal structure," she said, and she pointed at the display with a trembling appendage. "The density is extraordinary, and his bones are reinforced in ways I have never seen in a sentient species. And this is not engineering or augmentation. And this is natural evolution." Down on the arena floor, Jinho moved forward again, and his stance had shifted to something more aggressive. And he attacked with combinations that flowed from one technique to the next. Without pauses, Solarix blocked with her upper arms and countered with her lower ones. And she was faster than him and stronger than him and had reach that he could not match. But she was also beginning to tire. And this realization sent a shock through her system that nearly caused her to miss his next attack. She had never been tired in combat before, and she had trained her entire life to be the perfect warrior. And no opponent had ever pushed her far enough for exhaustion to become a factor. But this human kept coming, and he absorbed every blow she landed. And he refused to stop. "Your planet," she gasped between exchanges, and her breath was coming harder now. "What kind of world produces creatures like you?" Jinho ducked under a sweeping strike and drove his fist into the joint of her lower left arm. And she hissed in pain and pulled the limb back to protect it. "Earth has heavy gravity," he answered, and his voice was steady despite his injuries. "Our ancestors chased prey across open plains for hours until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. And we evolved to outlast anything we hunted." He blocked a strike with his forearm and felt the bone vibrate from the impact. "But he did not retreat. We call it persistence hunting," he continued. And he pressed forward with another combination of attacks. "Our prey could always run faster than us, but they could not run longer." In the diplomatic box, Ambassador Yoon listened to this exchange with growing understanding, and she turned to Consul Beak with wonder in her eyes. He is not trying to defeat her in a single exchange, she realized, and her voice was barely a whisper. He is wearing her down, and he is hunting her. The Kethrani nobles in the surrounding sections had come to the same realization, and their murmurs of confusion had transformed into something that sounded almost like fear. And they watched the human absorb blow after blow while their princess began to slough Solarix, launched a desperate offensive with all four arms moving in coordinated patterns that should have been impossible to defend against. And several strikes landed on Jinho with bone-crushing force, and he went down again with a sound that made the crowd wince. But before the cheering could begin, he was rising once more, and this time he caught one of her arms as he stood. And he used her own momentum against her, and he twisted her limb into a joint lock that drew a cry of surprise from the princess. She had never been grappled before. Then Kethrani combat focused on striking and weapon techniques, and this close-quarters manipulation of her body was completely foreign to her training. And she struggled to break free, but found that the human's grip was like iron. "How?" she demanded, and frustration and exhaustion colored her voice. Your species is supposed to be weak. Jinho applied more pressure to the lock, and he felt her resistance weakening as her overtaxed muscles began to fail. We are weak, he agreed, and his voice was calm despite the agony he was suppressing. We are slower than most predators and weaker than most prey, and we have no claws or fangs or armored skin. And by every measure, we should have been extinct millions of years ago. He shifted his weight and added another arm to the lock. And now 2 of her 4 limbs were immobilized. But we survived, he continued. And there was something fierce beneath his quiet words. We survived ice ages and predators and diseases and each other. And we survived because we refused to give up. And we refused to accept that any challenge is too great. And we refuse to lie down and die no matter how badly we are beaten. Solarix twisted in his grip with desperate strength, and she broke free with a movement that nearly dislocated her shoulder. And she stumbled backward with her scales shifting through colors that no one in the arena had ever seen on her before. You should have fallen, she said. And her chest heaved with exhaustion, and her arms trembled with fatigue she had never experienced. Everything I know says you should have fallen in the first exchange. Jinho stood before her with blood running down his face and bruises covering every visible inch of his skin. And he should have been broken, and he should have been unconscious. And yet his eyes were clear, and his stance was ready. Everything you know is about to change, he said. And then he moved forward once more. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the impossible continued. And Dr. Veleth recorded every moment with scientific instruments that could barely keep up with what they were measuring. And Ambassador Yoon gripped the railing with white-knuckled hands as she watched her attach fight a battle that would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. Princess Solarix met his, charged with everything she had left. And the sound of their collision echoed across the arena. And for the first time in 10,000 years of Kethrani history, an outsider was fighting a member of the royal family to a standstill and in the private viewing box of Emperor Kethra himself. The ancient ruler leaned forward with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, and he watched this human refuse to be broken. And he began to understand that the galaxy was about to become a very different place. You'll fall in seconds. Human, the alien princess mocked, but she didn't expect his strength. Part 2. The ceremonial gong sounded across the grand arena with a deep resonance that Jinho felt in his chest. And Princess Solarix moved toward him with the casual confidence of a predator approaching prey that could not possibly escape her. First strike came from her upper right arm, and it swept toward his head with enough force to shatter stone. But Jinho was already moving to his left before the blow could land, and he felt the wind of her fist pass within centimeters of his face. The crowd gasped at the near miss, and several Kethrani nobles leaned forward in their seats with sudden interest. And the princess paused for a brief moment with something that might have been surprise flickering across her scale features. Quick reflexes, she acknowledged, and her voice carried a hint of genuine curiosity beneath the contempt. But reflexes alone will not save you. She attacked again with 2 arms this time, and Jinho ducked under the first strike and redirected the second with a subtle movement of his forearm. And he used her own momentum to create distance between them. And the crowd murmured with confusion at techniques they had never witnessed. 15 seconds had passed since the gong, and Jinho remained standing without a single blow landed against him. And this was already longer than most of the princess's previous opponents had lasted. Ambassador Yoon watched from the diplomatic box with her hands gripped tightly on the railing. And Consul Beak stood beside her with a translation device pressed to her ear as she listened to the confused commentary from nearby. Kethrani spectators, they do not understand why he keeps moving away, Beak whispered to the ambassador, and her eyes never left the arena floor. In Kethrani combat, retreating is considered cowardice. but they cannot deny that he has not yet fallen down on the obsidian surface. Princess Alarix pressed her attack with increasing speed, and her forearms created patterns of strikes that seemed impossible to track. And yet Jinho continued to evade and redirect without ever attempting to strike back. 30 seconds passed, and the arena grew quieter as the crowd realized they were witnessing something unexpected. And the betting pools that had given Jinho zero chance of survival began to shift as uncertainty spread through the spectators. "Stand still and fight," Solarix demanded, and her scales had shifted to a deep crimson that indicated frustration or anger. "Face me properly instead of running like frightened prey." Jinho said nothing in response, and he simply continued to move with an economy of motion that made each evasion look almost effortless. And he kept his eyes locked on the princess as he tracked the patterns of her attacks. 45 seconds. And the murmurs in the crowd had grown to open discussion as aliens from dozens of species tried to understand what they were witnessing. And several Kethrani warriors near the arena floor stood with expressions of disbelief. 1 minute approaches, the ceremonial announcer declared, and his voice carried a note of surprise that he could not entirely hide. "The human challenger still stands." Princess Alarix launched herself forward with all 4 arms extended, and this attack was designed to be unavoidable, and it covered every angle of approach with devastating force. And Jinho did the only thing possible and dropped to the ground and rolled beneath her charge. The gong sounded again to mark 1 minute, and Jinho rose to his feet as the crowd erupted in chaos. And he had done what no one believed possible. And he had survived. The challenge is met. Ambassador Yoon called out from the diplomatic box, and her voice carried clear authority despite the trembling in her hands. "Earth has proven its worth, and we await the princess's support for our trade petition." Princess Alarix stood frozen in the center of the arena, and her scales cycled through colors that Jinho did not recognize. And then she turned to face him with an expression that had transformed from contempt to something far more dangerous. "No," she said, and her voice silenced the crowd with its intensity. "You have proven only that humans can run, and this does not demonstrate strength. And this demonstrates only that you are prey with better survival instincts than most." She pointed at Jinho with one of her lower arms, and her golden eyes burned with wounded pride. "Continue the fight," she demanded. "Show me that you can do more than flee, or admit that your species is exactly what I claimed." The crowd roared approval at this extension of the combat, and they wanted blood, and they wanted to see this strange human finally broken. And the sound washed over Jinho like a physical force. He looked up at Ambassador Yoon, and she shook her head with desperate emphasis, and her expression begged him to accept the technical victory and walk away. But Jinho knew that walking away now would mean nothing had truly changed. "I accept," he said, and his voice was calm despite the thundering of his heart. "But understand that I was only defending before, and now I will also attack." Princess Alarix laughed with genuine delight at this statement, and she spread all 4 arms wide in a gesture of invitation. "Then attack, little human, and let us see what you truly offer." Jinho moved first for the first time in the match, and he closed the distance between them with explosive speed that made several Kethrani gasp. And the princess struck at him with her upper arms, but he was already inside her reach, and he drove his elbow into her midsection with all the force his body could generate. The impact echoed across the silent arena, and Solarix stumbled backward with shock written across her features. And she looked down at where he had struck her as if she could not believe what had just happened. "You hit me," she said, and wonder and anger mixed in her voice. "You actually hit me." Jinho pressed forward before she could recover, and he used techniques from a dozen different earth martial arts, and he struck at joints and pressure points that were common to most bipedal species. and each blow landed with precision that came from years of military training. The princess fought back with fury now, and her attacks came faster and harder than before, and Jinho could not evade them all. And the first blow caught him across the ribs with enough force to lift him off his feet and send him crashing to the obsidian floor. The crowd cheered as Jinho lay motionless for a moment, and Princess Solarix stood over him with satisfaction beginning to replace her anger. And she raised her foot to press him into submission, but Jinho rolled away from her stomp and rose to his feet, despite the fire burning in his side. And he settled back into his fighting stance with blood now trickling from a cut above his eye. "How are you still standing?" Solarix whispered. And for the first time uncertainty crept into her voice. That blow would have ended any Kathrani warrior. Jinho wiped the blood from his eye and took a breath that sent pain shooting through his damaged ribs. "Humans do not fall easily," he said. And then he moved forward to continue the fight. The princess struck him again and again, and each blow should have been enough to end the match. And yet Jinho kept rising, and he kept fighting. And he kept coming forward with a determination that the arena had never witnessed before. In the scientific observation section above the diplomatic boxes, a Volanthi researcher turned to her colleague with trembling hands. "Are you recording this?" she asked. And her voice was barely a whisper. "Every moment," her colleague replied. And his multiple eyes were fixed on the arena floor with academic fascination. "I think we have severely miscalculated this species below them." Jinho took another devastating hit and went down hard, and the crowd held its breath. And Princess Solarix waited with her chest heaving from exertion she had never felt in combat before. Slowly, impossibly, Jinho pushed himself up from the obsidian floor and rose to face her once more, and for the first time in her life, Princess Solarix felt something she had never experienced while facing a single opponent. She felt fear. "You'll fall in seconds, human," the alien princess mocked, but she didn't expect his strength. Part 1. The grand arena of Valanthos Prime stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian stone, and its tiered seats rose so high that the uppermost levels vanished into artificial clouds. And tonight every seat was filled with aliens who had come to witness the festival of Proving Park. Jinho stood at the edge of the diplomatic viewing box and watched the current match below, where 2 Kathrani warriors circled each other with ceremonial blades that hummed with barely contained energy. And he noted how the crowd roared with each clash of weapons. "You should sit down," Ambassador Yu Mira said from behind him, and her voice carried the careful tone of someone who had spent 30 years navigating impossible political situations. "The Emperor's daughter keeps looking at our section, and I do not think she approves of humans standing while Kathrani fight." Jinho turned to face his superior, and he offered a small nod before taking his assigned seat among the other Earth delegation members. And he noticed that they were the only species in the arena who did not have scales or extra limbs or towering height. The Kathrani were magnificent creatures by any standard, and they stood nearly 3 meters tall with iridescent scales that shifted color with their moods. And their forearms allowed them to perform feats of combat that seemed almost like dancing. And they had ruled this sector of the galaxy for 10,000 years through strength and martial excellence. Tonight marked the 3rd evening of the festival, and Earth's delegation had been invited as a gesture of diplomatic courtesy, though Jinho suspected the invitation was meant to remind humans of their place in the galactic order. And that place was very much at the bottom. The match below ended when warrior disarmed the other and pressed a blade to her opponent's throat. And the crowd erupted in appreciation as the defeated warrior knelt in submission. And ceremonial attendants rushed forward to escort both fighters from the arena floor. "Now comes the interesting part," whispered Consul Beek Sumin from Jinho's left, and she gestured toward the royal viewing platform across the arena. where the emperor sat surrounded by his advisors and children. Princess Solarix Valkethra rose from her seat beside her father. And even from this distance, Jinho could see the confident way she moved. And her scales shimmered with deep purple and gold patterns that marked her royal bloodline. And she descended the stairs toward the arena floor with the grace of someone who had never known defeat. "The third princess fights tonight," Beak explained quietly, and her diplomatic training evident in how she kept her expression neutral despite her obvious fascination. "She has won 47 consecutive matches in these festivals, and no one has lasted more than 30 seconds against her." Jinho watched the princess reach the arena floor, and he studied how she stretched her forearms in preparation. And he noted the way other Kethrani in the crowd leaned forward with excitement and admiration. The ceremonial announcer's voice boomed across the arena through translation devices that rendered the Kethrani language into 100 different tongues simultaneously. And he declared that Princess Solarix would accept any challenger who wished to test their worth against royal blood. Several warriors from minor noble houses stepped forward over the next hour, and Jinho watched each match with careful attention. And he observed how the princess fought with brutal efficiency and controlled aggression, and not one opponent managed to touch her before she forced their submission after her 5th victory. Princess Solarix turned toward the diplomatic sections of the arena, and her gaze swept across the assembled representatives of various galactic species until it settled on the human delegation. And a thin smile crossed her scaled features. "Honored guests from the younger worlds," she called out, and her voice carried clearly through the translation systems. "I see representatives from the planet called Earth among us tonight, and I understand they seek trade agreements with the Kethrani Empire." Ambassador Yoon rose from her seat and offered a formal bow, and Jinho could see the tension in her shoulders, even though her face remained calm and diplomatic. "We are honored by the invitation to witness Kethrani excellence," Yoon replied, and her words were carefully chosen to show respect without submission. "The Festival of Proving demonstrates why your empire has thrived for millennia." Princess Solarix laughed, and the sound echoed through the arena with an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Thrived through strength," the princess corrected, and she took several steps toward the human section with her forearms spread wide in a gesture that seemed both welcoming and threatening. "Tell me, Ambassador, do humans understand strength? Or do you hide behind your words and your diplomacy because you have nothing else to offer?" The arena grew quiet as thousands of aliens watched this exchange with hungry anticipation. And Jinho felt his colleagues tense around him as they recognized the dangerous direction of this conversation. "Humans have many kinds of strength," Yoon answered carefully, and she kept her voice steady despite the obvious insult. "We hope to demonstrate our value as trading partners through the quality of our goods and the honor of our agreements." "Trading partners?" Solarix repeated, and she made the words sound like something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her foot. "The Kethrani do not trade with the weak, Ambassador, and I see nothing before me but soft creatures from a soft world who would crumble at the first sign of hardship." Jinho stood before he realized he was moving, and he felt Ambassador Yoon's hand on his arm, trying to pull him back down. But he gently removed her grip and stepped to the front of the viewing box. With respect, "Princess," he said, and his voice was calm and clear, "you judge us without evidence, and that seems unworthy of someone who values strength." The arena erupted in shocked murmurs, and no one spoke to Kethrani royalty in such a manner, and certainly not a member of a species that had only achieved interstellar travel within the last century. Princess Solarix's scale shifted to a darker purple that Jinho recognized as a sign of anger or interest, or perhaps both, and she moved closer to the human section until she stood directly below their viewing box. "And what evidence would you offer, little human?" she asked, and her golden eyes studied him with an intensity that made several of his colleagues look away. A challenge, Jinho replied simply, and he ignored the sharp intake of breath from Ambassador Yoon behind him. If a human can last 1 minute against you in the arena, you will support Earth's trade petition, and if we fail, our delegation will leave with whatever shame you wish to place upon us. The princess stared at him for a long moment, and then she began to laugh with genuine amusement. 1 minute, she repeated, and her voice dripped with contempt. Very well, human, and I accept your challenge. And when you fall in seconds, your entire species will know its place in this galaxy. Jinho removed his diplomatic jacket and handed it to the horrified Ambassador Yoon, and he made his way down to the arena floor as the crowd buzzed with excitement and disbelief. And when he stepped onto the obsidian surface and faced the towering princess, she looked down at him with a smile that promised pain. You'll fall in seconds. Human, she said. Jinho settled into a ready stance and took a slow breath. Then you have nothing to worry about, he answered.